Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's February 8th, 2021, in Hillsborough, North Carolina, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 23, Text 34. Shri Sukha Uvacha Ityukta Dvija Patnyastha Yagyavatam Punargataha Te Chana Suyavastabi Shri Bir Satra Maparayan. Please chant. Shri Sukha Uvacha. Shri Sukadev Goswami said, Iti, with these words, Uktaha, spoken to, Dvijapatnyaha, the wives of the Brahmanas, Taha, they, Yagyavatam, to the place of sacrifice, Punaha, again, Gataha, went, Te, they, their husbands, Cha, and Anasuyavaha, not inimical, Tabahi, together with them, Stribahi, their wives, Satram, the sacrificial performance, Aparayam, they completed. BBT translation. Srila Sukadeva Goswami said, thus instructed, the wives of the Brahmanas returned to the place of sacrifice. The Brahmanas did not find any fault with their wives, and together with them, they finished the sacrifice. BBT purport. The wives of the Brahmanas obeyed Lord Krishna's order and returned to the sacrificial arena of their husbands, whereas the gopis, although ordered by Krishna to go home, remained in the forest to dance with him through the full moon night. Both the gopis and the Brahmanas' wives achieved pure love of Godhead. So I'm going to go to Krishna book. After being instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all the wives returned home to their respective husbands. Pleased to see their wives back home, the Brahmanas sat together with them and executed the performances of sacrifices as enjoined in the Shastras. According to Vedic principle, religious rituals must be executed by the husband and wife together. When the Brahmanas' wives returned, the sacrifice was duly and nicely executed. One of the okay, that will stop there. That's for the next one. And going to Sanatana Goswami's commentary. There we go. Sanatana Goswami says, the Brahmanas completed the sacrifice with their wives who had received the mercy of the Lord. The fault in the sacrifice was removed and became endowed with all good qualities. Instead of tabihi, sometimes swabihi is found. The Brahmanas with each of their wives individually completed the sacrifice. Without their wives, the sacrifice could not be completed. By the mercy of the Lord's words, or by the influence of their returning with the Lord's mercy, the husbands did not find fault with them. So, we're not going to speak today about the difference between the wives and the gopis, just simply to note, as been noted before, that the verse that Srila Prabhupada spoke to the gopis, telling them to go home, and the verse that Srila Prabhupada spoke to the wives, telling them to go home, is the identical verse. Like Krishna gave the identical instruction, and the gopis responded differently than did the wives. And just simply to note that there's each person and each group of persons spiritually with Krishna has a different relationship and a different service. And as noted here, they all became perfect, although their relationships at that particular time were different. What I'd like to focus on today is the fact that everything from an external material point of view was also perfect. that there wasn't any problem that occurred because of the wives going to see Krishna and then going home. Normally, that would have caused a problem. And as we talked about the other day, in the majority of cases, it seems that when somebody with inimical or non-devotee or materialistic devotee relatives seriously takes up Krishna consciousness, there tends to be opposition and criticism. That seems to be more the norm than this kind of a situation. But here we find that everything is perfectly done. All the faults are removed. So what were the faults that were removed? We have, of course, the faults that the yogic brahmanas themselves were silent when the cowherd boys came. That was a fault. And then we could say the fault was that the wives left because, as Srila Prabhupada explains and as Sanatana Goswami explains, it was necessary for the sacrifice to be done by husband and wife together. So one of my godbrothers tells a story. It's sort of a funny story and sort of an awful story, that his father wanted to perform a particular sacrifice. And so he asked a local Brahmana in his village, please perform the sacrifice for me. And the Brahmin says, I can't. My wife has passed away, and it's not possible for a householder Brahmana to do the sacrifice without his wife. And this devotee said, his father said, well, I have an unmarried daughter. You can marry her as your second wife, and then you can do the sacrifice for me. And the father didn't like check out the situation before he just offered his daughter. You know, he didn't do like any kind of research, which is why this sort of thing has basically gone out of practice in much of the world. Anyway, so the devotee was telling me that his younger sister got married. They had the whole yajna. And after the marriage, she found out that her husband had 6 children by his first wife, that she was now a stepmother to 6 children. So this is why, you know, totally blindly arranged marriages have gone out of fashion in the world, because the parents used to be very concerned about the wishes of their children and used to do proper research, and now it's not like that. But anyway, this story illustrates that without a wife, he couldn't do the yajna. We have a similar situation that happened even with the Lord, right? With Lord Ramachandra, after Sita went to the forest, he needed to do yajnas for the good of the kingdom, but he couldn't because his wife wasn't there, and he had taken a vow of Ekpatni Vrat. Now, Ekpatni Vrat doesn't mean having one spouse sequentially. You know, it doesn't mean I have a spouse, and then when I don't like them, I divorce them, and then I get another spouse, and when I don't like them, I divorce them, and I get another spouse. But even after the death of a spouse, you don't remarry. So Ekpatni Vrat meant that even though Sita had left the planet at that time, she had gone into the earth, still Ramachandra didn't take another wife. So that's actually what the vow of Ekpatni Vrat means. That means one spouse lifelong. Of course, we all know, like my grandmother did that. You know, after her husband passed away, she never remarried. She never looked for another spouse. I know Shruti Kirti, his wife, his mother also, her husband died when she was quite young and she never remarried. So that was a particular kind of standard. Anyway, the point is that the husband and wife have to perform the yajna together. This is part of the system of varnashram. There's a lot of mistaken ideas about the position of women in varnashram and the position of women in a Vedic society. And I've heard people say, even some people who really ought to know better, that women don't have any varna, that women don't have any, basically, personality, because your varna is your qualities. But if we look throughout the Bhagavatam, we'll find that marriages were very carefully arranged so that the varna of the husband and wife were the same. And you find a perversion of this, like you find a perversion of arranged marriage where they just don't even think about things. So you find a perversion of this where they look at the boy and girl have to be from the same family. You know, the family by birth has to be in the same varna. But that wasn't the idea. The idea was that the husband and wife had the same nature. Just like you find Kardama Muni, who was a Brahmana, and he prayed to the Lord, I want a compatible wife. And so the Lord came and said, I'll give you a girl just according to your heart. Now, the girl from a family background was a Kshatriya. She was the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu. She was a princess by birth, but her nature was that of a Brahmani. And therefore, she was And I'm not saying that, but Lord Vishnu himself said that you have the same nature. And therefore she was able to be happy living as an austere Brahmani in the forest. I mean, later Kardama, when he said, you were accustomed to luxury as a girl, so I'll give you some luxury. But there was this concept that the man and woman should be of the same guna, the same qualities. And why should you be of the same guna? Because your guna, your qualities, determines your karma or your activities. Your activities we do in life is not according to just what we look like or what family we came from. It's about who we are, what we're good at, what we enjoy, what we're comfortable with. It's not even just what we're good at. It's what suits us as an individual, what fits us as an individual. And the reason there's these different demarcations is there's different definitions of dharma for each of the varnas. Like a brahmana is never supposed to be violent, or not, very rarely. If a brahmana is violent, it's a disturbance. But a kshatriya, if they're never violent, that's a disturbance. Therefore, we find Vishvamrita, once he became a brahmana, he came to Dasarath, please kill the demons. He was competent to kill the demons as a brahmana. He could use his brahminical powers for that purpose. But he said, that's not my dharma. I mean, when the brahmanas killed Vena, that was a very unusual emergency kind of a situation. Yes? So as far as husband and wife, why do you want the husband and wife to have the same qualities? Not just so they'll get along and they'll understand each other, but so they can work together. And it goes so far that for a brahmana, if the wife isn't there, he can't do his yagyas. It has to be done with the wife. And she's not just there as, some ornament. She's not just like a decoration that she has to be there. She's a participatory in the yajna. And this is true across the board. In any of the varnas, like Prabhupada talks about an ideal marriage. And he's saying, the wife is spinning, the husband is weaving, together they make a cloth. Because they had the same varna, they were working together in their career. Or he talks about seeing a potter family where the husband and wife were making pots together and the children were being trained. And this was the way it was all over the world. And so when the Shastra talks about the wife serving the husband, this doesn't just mean domestic duties. In fact, until very recently, all but the poorest people had servants for domestic duties. All over the world. Today, it's still true in a place like India, where practically everybody has a servant, unless you're extremely poor. But it used to be like that everywhere. It used to be like that in Europe. It used to be like that in America. So it's not that all women had to, all they were doing was cooking, cleaning, laundry, and childcare and things like that. That would imply that every woman simply has the guna of a Shudra, which we can see practically it's not true. We see in our practical experience it's not true, and shastrically it's not true. Right? Madhvacharya said, if all the women were Shudras, how would we have Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya children being born? He actually says this in regard to women getting the Gayatri Mantra. Yeah. So what did it mean to serve the husband? It also meant to serve the husband in his work, to assist the husband in his work. That the husband and wife were partners in their work, that was ideal, this kind of partnership. And when we did research in the Bhagavatam and Prabhupada's instructions about how a husband was to treat a wife, Prabhupada talks about this partnership. He talks about a partnership in devotional service. And we see this sometimes, the husband and wife are in the kitchen together. That's what Advaitacharya and his wife did. They cooked together for the deities. That's what Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and his wife did. They were serving together. Of course, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the wife's inclinations and the husband's inclination are different. But that was in Vedic times, they tried to avoid that. They tried to avoid that the wife's career was totally different than the husband's career. Then you start having this difficulty between your home duties and your career duties. Then you start having this conflict. The conflict also came about from the Industrial Revolution. But anyway, there was this completeness in the home. People who say that women don't have any careers, one of my friends said to me, what do they do with the word gopi? How do they explain the word gopi? What does gopi mean? cow herd women or girls, females who are cow herders. Well, look at that. That's their career. You know, we're always talking about the gopis, the gopis, the gopis. Well, what do you think they're doing? They're also engaged in cow herding. And we see, like, the gopis, they're going to Mathura to sell milk products. They're businesswomen. That's what they're doing. Now, of course, when they go to Mathura to sell milk products, Krishna uses that anyway. That's another story. Then we go into Leela. But putting aside Leela, that was socially acceptable and socially part of the culture for the women to be going together to sell the family's milk products. And when we hear about Mother Yasoda churning butter and so many things, she wasn't just doing that cooking for her family. She's doing that part of the family business. This is what they were doing. So this is completeness. This is completeness, right? For Varna and ashram position, when you have the husband and wife working together in the same business. And we all know about the mom and pop store, right? They're working together to run a shop or working. And Draupadi talks about Satyabhama, how she was the only one who knew how much money was coming in and how much money was going out of the kingdom. That she was the one managing the finances. And they were the emperor. We're talking about they were running the planet. And Draupadi was basically the secretary of the treasury. She also said that she ran the royal household of 100,000 people. That's a decent-sized city. You know, so this was the relationship. Now, when somebody takes up spiritual life, they often lose interest in all these other things. They often lose interest. In fact, Krishna says that a self-realized person has no reason to do any work in the world. He said they have no reason to give it up, and they have no reason to do it. And it's quite common that when people fully take up Krishna consciousness and surrender to Krishna, they no longer care about their obligations to their family or their career or their this or their that, right? It's extremely common. Of course, what we've seen in the Krishna consciousness movement is people may feel like that initially, and after some time they think, I really need to pick these things up and be a devotee as a normal person in the world. But this tendency to say, you know, just forget about all these other considerations is there. And this particular pastime shows us that even if you fully surrender to Krishna, these other things can all be complete also. And I think this fact touches on a very deep fear that many of us have about surrendering to Krishna. You know, it's the fear that our inimical family members have about our surrendering to Krishna, where they're like, you know, if you surrender to Krishna, you'll neglect your family, you'll neglect your education, you'll neglect your career, your whole life will fall apart, because people do that kind of thing. But it's also our fear. You know, I remember talking to my godbrother Burjan Prabhu about this many years ago. And he said, you know, are you afraid you're going to get too ecstatic? You'll just, you know, lose it. You won't be able to function in the world. And I said, yeah, I am. I'm afraid, you know, that if I really surrender to Krishna, I'll become a mad person. And so I'm like, I better not surrender to Krishna. I won't be functional anymore. Right? There's this fear that I'll fall in love so much that I'll lose control. Isn't it? Right? I'll lose something. I'll lose, you know, I'll become nuts. Or like it says in the Bhagavatam, they're dancing and singing like a madman, right? Not caring for outsiders. Oh my God, what if that happens to me? Then they'll throw me out of the temple. You know. Or I'm afraid I'll just lose awareness of the world, like Mahaprabhu. He gets into internal consciousness. He doesn't know where he is. He falls into the ocean. You know, he's rubbing his face against the walls. And so you read this, you get kind of scared and you think, oh my God, you know, if I really surrender to Krishna, what's going to happen? How are things going to go on? You know, of course, we're also afraid, you know, maybe I'll lose my autonomy. maybe Krishna will just direct me what to do. He says, Arjuna, just be an instrument and I'll just be an instrument like a machine. We have all these other fears about surrendering to Krishna. Will Krishna really do what I like? Maybe he'll take everything away and he'll just treat me badly, and better if I control my own life because I'm so good at controlling my own life. But, we have these sort of, that was sarcastic. So we have all these sort of fears. Yes. And this pastime is showing us that everything is complete. So I thought we'd look at three verses from the Bhagavad Gita in this regard. And so the first one is from the 8th chapter, verse 28, where Krishna says, a person who accepts the path of devotional service, that's how Prabhupada translates it, the word in the Sanskrit is yogi, is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, undergoing austerities, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. So when one attains Krishna consciousness, everything else is included. Everything that we would want from being a good person in the family, being a good citizen, whatever, having a good job, all the things we hope to gain from that, right? If you want to put it in NVC language, all the fulfillments of our needs, all the, we're thinking, I'm going to do this strategy and that strategy to fulfill my needs. But all that is fulfilled by Krishna consciousness, which is why Krishna says that a self-realized person doesn't have a reason to do those other things. So it doesn't have a reason to do them. It doesn't have a reason not to do them. But one is no longer being impelled by some feeling of lack to do things. If one does go on, the wise of the Brahmanas didn't go back home to do sacrifices because they thought, oh, if I don't do sacrifices, I won't go to the heavenly planets. Or, my husbands won't love me and then I'll be unfulfilled. Or my family will reject. That wasn't why they went home. They went home just to please Krishna. They didn't care about all those sort of things for their own sake at all. It didn't matter to them. Krishna said, go home and do this. Okay, we'll go home and do this. That's, if Krishna wants. I'm writing of Raghunath Das Goswami, where Lord Chaitanya said, go home, don't act like a crazy person. He actually said that. He said, don't act like a crazy person. Go home, pretend to be a materialistic person. And when there's a chance for you to fully renounce everything, then that will come. So the Brahmins' wives were doing the same thing. But they were completely fulfilled. Anything you could get by having a happy marriage, anything you could get by having a community, anything you could get by doing sacrifices and being pious, they already had all that. Like Prabhupada always says, if you have $1 million, your $10 problems are solved. People like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, they don't worry about $10. I read once that for Bill Gates, what's a dime for most of us is $45,000 to him. Those problems are already solved. My Prabhupada says when you become rich, you don't have to try to separately drive away poverty. It's naturally there. So then we have, going a little higher than that, we turn to the 2nd chapter, text 40. In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution. So it's not just that whatever needs would be fulfilled, whatever desires would be fulfilled in these lower things are already included in Krishna consciousness. But there's a different quality to Krishna consciousness than is done in the external sphere. In the external sphere, everything is just in balance. Right? There's this nice quote where Prabhupada says, you cannot harm anyone or do good to anyone. All you can do is harm yourself or do good to yourself. Because on the material sphere, I can be an agent for your good karma and I can be an agent for your bad karma, but I can't change your karma. Prabhupada talks about the illusion of thinking that if we have a family and we're living together, we can change other people's karma. It just doesn't work like that. I can be the delivery person for what you ordered. That's all I can do. Now, if I act as an agent of your good karma, if I use my free will to try to do good for you, then I accrue some good karma. And if I act as the agent of your bad karma to try to hurt you, then I accrue some bad karma. Therefore, I'm only helping or hurting myself. But I'm not really changing the balance. Whatever good karma you're getting, you've paid for. Whatever bad karma you're getting, you've paid for. I can't do anything to change the balance. And even for myself on a karmic level, everything is in balance. Whatever I enjoy karmically, I've had to pay some price for that. So I never get an overall gain. Whatever gain I get karmically, I've had to pay for that. It all ends up even. But Krishna consciousness is not like that. There's no loss. You know, on the mundane level, if I buy something, then there's a loss from my bank account. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? There's always a payment before or afterwards. There's always some loss, and everything just balances. It all just balances. But Krishna consciousness is not like that. There's no payment. You can say, well, I think it's a payment. There's not. The only so-called payment is giving up something that's illusory and suffering. Is that a payment? That's not a payment. It may appear like that to us. You know, that, well, I'm going to lose my pride and my ego but those are all hurting us. Does that make sense to everybody? It's like if I've got somebody beating me, what's beating me is my false ego and my lust and my anger and my greed. They're whipping me. So I'm giving that up for Krishna consciousness. That's not a loss. You know, it appears like that to a conditioned soul. But in Krishna consciousness, there's no loss. It's simply gain. And it's the gain that goes on increasing. Materially, things can't increase unlimitedly. They just can't. They're finite and they're in balance. Like my friend Rukmini often has said to me as we're working on our book on Varna, that economically, you can't keep going up. Because economics is ultimately based on natural resources, and natural resources are finite. And that the economists who talk about constant growth, they first divorced economics from land. That was what they did. They said economics has nothing to do with land. And then you can talk about exponential growth and just going up and up and up and up and up and up and up. It's not possible. If you try to go up and up and up and up and up and up and up, you're paying somewhere. There's a price somewhere that you're paying. And eventually you run out of stuff. But spiritually, it's not like that. Spiritually, Krishna is always expanding. Krishna's beauty is always expanding. This Wednesday, I get to talk about Krishna's beauty in my class. Krishna's beauty is always expanding. Krishna's knowledge is always expanding. Krishna's power is always expanding. It's not static. It's ecstatic. It's dynamic. And so Krishna consciousness is also always expanding, which is one reason it doesn't get boring. So there's no payment. There's no loss. There's no counterbalance. When we take up Krishna consciousness, we're actually doing a positive good for ourselves and others. Whereas karmically, we're not. All we're doing is balancing. There's no net gain. Like they say, matter and energy are not created or destroyed. They just transmute. But then it goes there. Krishna goes beyond that to a very clear statement in 646. A yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. So because there's no loss or diminution, because things are always expanding, you don't just get all the satisfaction that you would have gotten from everything else, but you get greater than that. You get far greater than that. And it may look like you're an ordinary person. It may look like the Brahmana's wives, they're doing their Varna by being part of the sacrifice. It may look like the Brahmana's wives, they're doing their ashram duties by helping their husbands and taking care of their children and serving the elders and so forth. It may look like that, but they're not. They're doing bhakti. And so what they're getting is far greater than any of those things. They're not identifying with any of that anymore. They're not thinking anymore, we're Brahmanis. They're thinking, we're the beloveds of Krishna. We're doing this because Krishna asked us to. They're not thinking we're doing this because we're very moral people in the world. And we are following the Shastric rules. That's not what's motivating them. What's motivating them is love for Krishna. Krishna will be happy if we do this. It will make Krishna happy. It's part of my loving exchange with Krishna. And to go back to the point about the gopis, they understood that by staying with Krishna was making Krishna happy, and the Brahmanas' wives understood by going back to their husbands was making Krishna happy. But the point is making Krishna happy. That's the point. And therefore they appear to be part of the world, but they're greater than anything in the world. So all of the fears that we have, at least that I have, about surrendering to Krishna, of course, when I first joined the Krishna consciousness movement, I thought I was fully and completely surrendered to Krishna. That's another topic. I thought like that. Now I have fully surrendered. I thought, dropping out of college and giving my father back the car and moving into the ashram, living out of a little box, a little milk crate, and sleeping on the floor, that I was fully surrendered to Krishna. And I remember as a very new in the temple, like a week or so in the temple, when one of the other ladies said to me, you don't fully love Krishna, and I was offended. I said, of course I fully love Krishna. Otherwise, why would I be here? I'm a fully surrendered devotee. I figured, in a few days, maybe a month or so, I'd be a prema bhakta. Right? But as I go on practicing Krishna consciousness, I become much more aware of why I don't surrender. That I start to surrender, and then I'm like, I don't really know if I want to do that. What about my fruitive activities? What about my, philosophical speculations? What about my yoga abilities? What about my this? What about my that? What will happen to all these things if I surrender? And that was the point of view of the yogic brahmanas, wasn't it? They're like, we don't want to surrender to Krishna. If we surrender to Krishna, all these terrible things will happen. And even we'll see as we go on in this chapter that the brahmanas condemn themselves. They say, oh, we're terrible. To hell with everything about us. Our wives are more advanced, but we're still not going to go see Krishna. Because Kamsa might get mad and we might get in trouble. So we have this example to show that our fears are unfounded. That not only will we get everything that anybody gets in the world, not necessarily the external details, but not only will we get the satisfaction that everybody gets in the world, but we'll get far more than that. We'll get something that's ever expanding and ever fresh, and that fulfills us to such an extent that we'll say, why was I looking for broken pieces of glass when I could have a valuable jewel? So questions, comments, corrections, additions, subtractions. Yes, Marge. Yes. Ramchandra did do the sacrifice because he got a deity of his wife. Yes, thank you. Well, if you remember, just let me know. Anybody else? Krishna Priya. Yeah, I mean, Srila Prabhupada was pleased with the householder couples who went to London and did more than the sannyasis could have done. So there's, the way that Krishna has set up the varnashram system is most of these things in the world are meant to be done by couples. I mean, in a traditional varnashram system, the renunciates aren't doing that kind of thing at all. The renunciates are teaching, or they're doing their, their own bhajans, either teaching people who come to them or whatever, but they're not out in the world doing stuff. That's the idea of renunciation, that you're renouncing that stuff. So the idea is to do this by the married couples, and that's most powerful when the husband and wife are a team like that. It becomes a very, very powerful equation. I mean, Prabhupada says there's a purpose for male and female. They exist even in the spiritual world. Yes. The one person, you have, yeah. Yes, it's a synergy. It's a synergy. I mean, we have just even individuals working together, but there is some difference in male and female energy. I mean, we don't want to generalize. It's not like all women are like this and all men are like this. Everybody's an individual. But there are some general differences between male energy and female energy, even spiritually, even in the ultimate, the real males and females. And the combination of that energy seems to be very powerful. It's the combination of that energy that creates the whole world with Shiva and Parvati, for example. So that's when that's done, that's what moves things in the world. Therefore, it's the grihastas who are the main people who do everything in the world. Yes. Purva and Kamalini are a very nice example. Speak about Apurva and Kamalini's example for a long time. Running temples together, running restaurants together. Force for preaching in the Hare Krishna movement. And we have our Leela Shakti Tota Gopinath powerful duo here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.